What's up, guys? Brett Okamoto from ESPN, and it is the end of 2021. It's the beginning of 2022. We are here on ESPN MMA's YouTube channel to talk about all of that. Myself, my colleague Marc Raimondi, who joins me from beautiful Paris, France. He's out there talking to Ciryl Gane, who has a big fight in January. So make sure you check out Marc's piece on Ciryl Gane as that fight gets closer. But Marc, we're doing a few of these videos. We've done fights we want to see in 2022. We are doing the biggest storylines from 2021, 2022. And we are giving Conor McGregor his own segment, which I think might annoy some people, but it is appropriate. He is the biggest star in the UFC, in the sport of mixed martial arts, despite a winless 2021. And oh man, are there so many questions around Conor McGregor going into 2022. So what I want to ask you first, Marc, let's set the table, right? Guy injured himself, broke his leg against Dustin Poirier last summer. Says he will be back to sparring in April. Anticipate a return of an early summer. So let's say that we're going to see him basically in the second half of 2022. I think that's fairly reasonable expectation. How many times do you think he fights in 2022?
Good question. I think certainly there are variables at play there, but I would say twice. I think twice is probably a realistic number. Let's say if he fights in July, I would imagine they may want him for International Fight Week in July. And then I could see him fighting one more time before the end of the year, certainly. Maybe December, maybe even before that.
That's exactly how I feel. I think he will fight in July. I think he'll fight in December. Of course.
Or maybe even November at MSG, that's a possibility.
Maybe so. But of course, there are a lot of variables. There are injuries. There are contracts, things that we need to talk about. He only has 2 fights left. He has come out and said he only has 2 fights left on his UFC contract. So that can have a huge impact on who he's booked against, when he's booked, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, I am with you. I believe he fights twice. Let me ask you my next question. Who do you think he fights?
Very good question. We have spoken about this before, and we've had some lengthy discussion pieces on ESPN.com. And my thoughts on that have changed just slightly. And I know that McGregor wants a title shot. In fact, he replied to my tweet for that discussion that we had, a few weeks ago about who he should fight next. And we know he wants to fight for the title next. And that would be Charles Oliveira, who of course beat Dustin Poirier in December. I still don't think that is, and look, maybe I'm crazy, and maybe the UFC does give him that fight, and maybe Oliveira does say, hey, I want to fight McGregor. I do think that Oliveira will fight Justin Gaethje first. So I still think, one of the major options for McGregor is Tony Ferguson. He's a guy that we mentioned in that discussion piece. I would put Michael Chandler on that list, and you could probably even throw Dustin Poirier now back on the list now that he's not the UFC lightweight champion. He lost to Oliveira. I know McGregor feels like there's still unfinished business. And, I spoke with Dustin Poirier before the Oliveira fight in Florida, and I asked him about another fight, a 4th fight with McGregor. And he didn't write it off. He said that he didn't think that the chapter with him and McGregor would ever be closed. And I know McGregor feels like he has some unfinished business because of the broken leg in the fight back in July. So maybe that's the fight. Maybe they do that one. I think those would be my 3 candidates: Ferguson, Chandler, and Poirier. And I guess you can put, Nate Diaz somewhere on the back end of that as well.
Yeah, I don't put it in the back end. I put it in the front end. I believe that he will fight Nate Diaz. And that depends on what Nate does, of course, right? Nate has 1 fight left on his contract. He wants to fight. I mean, he was open to fighting in November. He was open to fighting in December. He has tweeted that, he'll fight in January. He wants to fight the final fight on his contract. It could happen. He could fight Dustin Poirier before Conor is ready to go. I just think that when you're talking about Nate Diaz, you're talking about any Diaz, they're not super active these days, right, Marc? And even though Nate wants to be active, and if he wants a fight, UFC is obligated to give him one, right? I mean, they can't just sit the guy on the shelf. But the more I think about this, and the more I think about how big that Conor McGregor-Nate Diaz fight is, I just think somehow we end up there, man. I mean, you follow the money in MMA, right? And that's where the money is Conor McGregor-Nate Diaz fight. So if I'm handicapping it today, I know that some certain things have to fall in place, and there's some other great options for both guys. Of course, they're both superstars, so they have plenty of options on the table. But none of those options are the equal as them fighting one another. And I think that is the path that will eventually go down. So I think he fights Nate. this is my official prediction. If he fights Nate and loses, I think he fights maybe Dustin Poirier again. You know, if he fights Nate and wins, I think we're seeing that lightweight title shot, Mark. And I don't know if we'll see it. If we'll see it before the end of the year, but I think Conor McGregor will fight for the championship if he beats Nate Diaz. That is my guess going into 2022. My next question to you, Mark.
I could see a world where it's McGregor versus either Oliveira or Gaethje at MSG in November. I could see that world.
I mean, it sounds so easy, doesn't it? But like, if we look back on this and we say, oh, who did Conor fight? He fought Nate Diaz and for a championship. That seems like the easiest answer, does it not? It seems like, oh, it was like right there in front of us. Sometimes the easiest answer is the most correct answer. So that's what I'm going with. My next question to you, though, is, and this might be the most interesting one of all of them. Does he need to win? I keep hearing this, like, he's got to win. They got to find him a win. Like Conor McGregor has to win. Does he have to win? Because he just fought Dustin Poirier in 2021, and he lost both. Mm-hmm. And if you go into next year, he's still the biggest draw in the UFC by far. So I will ask you, Mark, does Conor McGregor need to win in 2021?
Yeah, and I think your answer is in the question, because we were just talking about this guy fighting for the title sometime in 2022 when he has one victory since 2016, and it was against Donald Cowboy Cerrone. So does he need to win? No, he just doesn't. He does not need to win. I mean, would it be easier for the UFC to match him if he does? Absolutely. It would make some of those fights, and certainly a title fight, a little bit easier to stomach if he gets a victory. But does he need to? No, of course not. I mean, he doesn't need to win until he loses his drawing power. And I haven't really seen him lose it all that much, right? At this point, I believe that the fights against Poirier were the two biggest pay-per-views of the year, and he lost the first one. Second one was even bigger, I believe, than the first one. And I guess it's just one of those things where you have to see where it goes, but he's not necessarily a big draw because he wins the fights. He's a big draw because he's Conor McGregor, and that carries a lot. That carries a lot of weight. Certainly, again, it would be good for him to win, right? I think that, you know, the UFC, I'm not saying they're rooting for him, but it would make their lives easier if he does pick up a victory in his first fight back. But I don't think nothing's really a must win until it is for McGregor, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree. It would be nice for the sport, I guess, to see this guy who is as big as the sport itself perform really, really well. You know, I think that would just be an exciting thing in general for the sport. You know, I think in an odd way, the sport is always in some ways rooting for McGregor, you know, just from a standpoint of, you know, he'll always be relevant, but I mean like staying relevant in the competition edge, you know, the fun fights at the top. They're just, you inject a little Conor McGregor in the top of these divisions, it just makes the whole sport better, right? So I think the sport, and whether it wants to admit it or not, in a weird way, is always kind of hoping Conor McGregor at least looks good in 2022. Okay, final question for you. I mentioned this already. He's got 2 fights left on his UFC contract. Does Conor McGregor re-sign with the UFC in 2022?
That's a really good question. I would probably say no. And I mean, it all depends on whether he can get those 2 fights or not. That is certainly not a guarantee. And the UFC could offer him a fight that he doesn't want, and he turns it down, and they can extend his contract. So maybe we don't get that discussion in 2022. Maybe we get it in 2023. There's also so many variables. Broken leg, you know, maybe he's not fully healthy when we think he's going to be. Maybe it's premature to say he's back in July or whatever we're saying in early summer. You know, COVID is still wreaking havoc. I don't know how that's going to factor into it. I hope it doesn't. I really, really, really hope it does not. But we live in a weird world, so we really can't really predict, you know, tomorrow. But if it does come to that, if it does come to McGregor, you know, biting out his last 2 fights on his contract in 2022, I want to clarify my answer. And when I say he doesn't resign, I think he becomes a free agent and he hears all offers first. I'm not saying he doesn't ultimately go back to the UFC. Maybe he does, but I do think he becomes an unrestricted free agent, and he sees what's out there. He sees what the marketplace is like, because look, let's be frank, Brett, there is a lot of money right now in boxing, and who knows how long that's going to last. And there are some promotions out there that are, giving out a lot of money right now that may not be around in a few years. I'm not going to mention any names. But I think it would behoove McGregor, right? And it would behoove anyone if you're a free agent and there's a ton of money being thrown around there to, frankly, lesser fighters than him, lesser names, a lot lesser names than McGregor. It would behoove him to see what it is on the free agent market, in the open marketplace. So I do think he will explore options. Doesn't mean to say that he does not ultimately re-sign with the UFC if that's the best deal, but I think he takes a look at boxing. He's boxed before. He's talked about, boxing Manny Pacquiao. I think he at least takes a look to see what kind of money is out there. And we could be talking about, purses in, the 20s and the 30 millions for a guy like McGregor, depending on who the opponent is. So I do think he takes a look. I'm not sure if he resigns or not with the UFC, but I do think he at least goes into that, that open market.
Yeah, it's a very, and you did a great job there, kind of talking through it. It's an impossible question to answer. You don't know what the landscape is going to look like. You don't know what kind of opportunities are going to be out there in the boxing space. I mean, who would have thought that Jake Paul at the end of this year would be coming off, knocking out Ben Askren, knocking out Tyron Woodley emphatically. I mean, in a viral type knockout in December 18th, just closing the year with that type of finish and all the buzz around a Jake Paul and what that fight would sell. I mean, you can't predict these things. I mean, who knows who's going to get into this celebrity boxing thing over the next year? So you just don't know what the opportunities are going to look like for Conor McGregor. I think that it's always been clear that Conor and the UFC, they butt heads as you would anticipate them doing, right? They're both trying to get the biggest piece of their pie in every fight, but they always end up coming together to make the business work. So part of me wants to believe in that history. And I do think that Conor would like to stay with the UFC if all things were equal. But again, if one of those crazy opportunities comes along where he can, like you said, go off and make $20-30 million, boxing somebody that, he probably doesn't even pose as a major threat. How can he not do that? How can you not do that for the money that's involved? So it's going to be interesting, man. If you guys check out our other videos on YouTube for the end of this year, going into 2022, I said the number one story to keep an eye on in 2022 would be Conor McGregor. And it's for this reason, man. It's for this reason. We don't know what's going to happen with him, but it's going to be a huge influential year, not only if he wins or loses, but then what does that mean for his contract status with the UFC? Does he finish out his contract with the UFC, 2 fights, and then we don't have Conor McGregor in the UFC anymore? We don't think of him as a UFC fighter. Is he boxing now? Like it's just, that would be a huge shift in the industry and the landscape of combat sports. So yeah, Conor McGregor, something to keep an eye on in 2022. Who would have guessed that, huh?
I remember when I interviewed Jake Paul after he knocked out Nate Robinson, and he said that he wanted to, box Conor McGregor, and McGregor was like kind of his final boss. And this was, November, December 2020. And absolutely no one took that seriously. I mean, I remember hearing it from him and I was like, okay, I mean, I get that he's saying that, but does anyone really think that could happen?
Yeah,
it could happen. It could really freaking happen. And the other thing to also add, Brett, is that McGregor has his own promotional company. He has McGregor Sports and Entertainment. Maybe he gets into the promotion game. Maybe McGregor is the next Triller or the next, promotion that's putting on these big, boxing MMA events. Who knows?
Nobody knows, man. Nobody knows. I once lived in a world where something like Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor seemed like fantasy. We learned then that anything can happen in MMA, and we continue to learn it over and over again as the years go on. So 2022 will certainly be interesting. Conor McGregor will be a huge part of that. Thank you for checking out this video. Make sure you check out our other ones, the fights we want to see most in 2022, and the biggest storylines of last year and next year. And stay tuned to ESPN MMA YouTube channel all year. We'll be bringing you interviews, on the ground analysis, the whole works. So thanks for joining, and enjoy the new year.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.